Hello, I'm Daniel Petersheim, and I worked in conjunction with Dr. Piro on the project entitled Ambiphilic Ferrocene-Bridged Ligands for Metals with Expanded Coordination Spheres. And if that topic doesn't sound exciting to you, I hope it will by the end of this presentation. So I'd like to start with nitrous oxide, N2O, which is also known as laughing gas, in case you can make that connection. And this is a greenhouse gas, and it's also known to contribute to ozone depletion. So we'd be interested in knowing how could we take this compound and promote reactions that convert it into something that would be less harmful or even beneficial. So N2O undergoes reactions. One of them is at the bottom of the screen. The problem is that nitrous oxide tends to be relatively stable, and reactions proceed slowly or under extreme conditions. So how could we make this happen in a more efficient way is the problem. Now, biology's answer is enzymes, which are catalysts, natural catalysts, proteins that help to facilitate chemical reactions in the body. They form and consume N2O with the help of metal ions embedded in the enzyme. So it's one of the things that we find is that in enzymes, they have metal ions that are associated with the active site, which is the place on the enzyme where it activates small molecules. CO2 is another example of a small molecule that is relatively stable, but it is activated by the enzymes, and those enzymes tend to have a characteristic bimetallic site. So first off, some definitions of things that you saw in the title that you may not be sure of. First of all is coordination. That refers to coordination chemistry, the study of complexes formed with a central metal atom or ion and one or more attached ligands. And just to define ligand right away, that's an ion or molecule attached to a metal atom through coordination bonds, and they contain a lone pair of electrons. So in the figure on the bottom right of the slide, at the middle of that figure is the metal ion, and then around it are the ligands that attach to it or coordinate with the metal ion. In this case, there are 6 different ligands that are attached to a central metal ion. Electrophile is an acceptor of an electron pair. The key part of the word is electro or electron. Then we have nucleophile, nucleo, nucleus, which is a source of an electron pair. And when we have these two things together, we get ambiphilic, which is a molecule that contains both an electrophilic site and a nucleophilic site. In this case, we're looking at metal sites, where one of them will serve as an electrophilic site, and the other one will serve as a nucleophilic site, and a molecule that contains them both is an ambiphilic molecule. So that leads us to the main question for our project. What would a synthetic molecule look like that could mimic the reactivity of the bimetallic sites on enzymes? Ferrocene is what we're going to start with as the backbone for our structure of the molecules that we are going to target and try to create. Here's ferrocene with one arm attached to it, and this is you'll notice the 3 nitrogen atoms. In the figure on the left, you can see the lone pairs that are attached to each nitrogen atom, and that's the means by which they will bond with a metal in between those 3 nitrogen atoms, so that the metal will bond or coordinate with all 3 of those nitrogen atoms. So that's one site where a metal can bond to this ligand. Now, what do we do on the other side of the ferrocene? In this figure, there is, on the other side, there is a phosphorus, a branch that contains phosphorus. Notice again the lone pair of electrons with which it can bond with the metal on that side. The problem with this, and this molecule has been synthesized in a previous ACRE project by Tyler Stauffer, and the limiting factor for this is that a smaller variety of metals will coordinate to just a single phosphorus atom than if we would have a more stable coordination site there, which would support metals of a wider variety of metals. So here we have on the top side of the figure on the left, you can see that we replace that branch of the molecule with what we will call the PNP branch, where there are two phosphorus atoms and a nitrogen atom, all having lone pairs, which can coordinate to a metal at that site and create a coordination bond there. On the right, you can see the rotating figure, and the blue atoms represent nitrogen, the yellow atoms represent phosphorus. So you should be able to identify there the NNN arm at the bottom, toward the bottom of the screen, and the PNP arm toward the top, coming off the ferrocene off the top. Here's the same figure, but in this case there are atoms at the coordination sites representing where the metals would be, and they are in red so that it's easy to identify where the metals would coordinate in our ligand. You can clearly see the two bimetallic sites. So our first method was to perform a literature review, see what we could find, and one of the purposes of this was to find relevant structures, some similar molecules or fragments with similar geometry to our molecules or the branches that we were trying to fix onto the ferrocene. And so here's an example of some of the things that we found, and they help to inform us of what the geometry might look like for our actual molecule, should we be able to synthesize it. Another thing that we came across through our literature review was another alternative structure, a branch for the top on the left-hand side. This one is a little different variety, a different version of that. That contains 3 phosphorus atoms to coordinate to the metal at that, and this is what we call the PPP version, with the 3 phosphorus atoms coordinating to the metal. The literature review also allowed us to put together a synthetic pathway, a plan of action for when we would get in the lab to try to follow these steps and create our product at the bottom right of the screen. Our other method was to use computational chemistry using software and density functional theory, mathematics that would allow us to be able to figure out the geometry of molecules and have an idea of how they might behave without actually synthesizing them, or before we did. This is one of the things that we did with that, and that is to do scans. One of the important questions for our reactivity with these compounds is the distance between the two metals. So once again, you can see the two metals in red. What this scan does is takes the metals closer and closer together and optimizes the geometry of the molecule at each step. And on the left, what we are left with is a graph that shows the energy that is required either to move the metals closer together or to spread them further apart. And this helps us to know the preferred geometry, if the distance between the two metals will be in a reasonable range that could fit a substrate between them and do the interesting chemistry we're looking for. And also, is it flexible? Does it take little energy in order to spread those branches apart or to push them together? So that's what we were looking for in these scans. This slide gives you an example of the broader picture that we were able to get of the energy characteristics as we vary the metal-metal distance, which is on the x-axis in these figures. What is the energy trade-off and how does that behave, which is shown on the y-axis in these figures. We were also able to model how this compound would look with a ligand, a small molecule, in between the two metals. So here, if you can see the red, gray, blue linear combination there in the middle, in between the two copper atoms, that is cyanate, which is similar to N2O, and so this is helping us to understand how that substrate could possibly fit in there, which end it would align to, is the distance a good width apart so that it could possibly activate that substrate in order to proceed with other chemical reactions. Finally, we were able to carry out some actual synthesis in the lab. Here's a proposed pathway that I showed you earlier in this presentation, and you'll notice at the second step where we have a compound that is symmetric having two formal groups coming off the ferrocene, and an important step was how to desymmetrize that and to make a compound that would react with one branch but not the other, which is a difficult task to do. So this step was a significantly hard step, and we got very low yields when we did this initially in our process of synthesis. So that did not work out real well. However, we were able to create a modified pathway that ended up being more efficient and contained fewer steps than did our original proposal. And so we found that in the process of trying to make a symmetric molecule from this symmetric diformal version here, that we actually were able to create a non-symmetric version with the PNP arm that you see at the bottom of this molecule on one side but not the other. So we were able to do that in yields that were better than the step mentioned on the previous slide, and this eliminated some intermediate steps. So this was a fortunate finding for us and allowed us to make our synthetic pathway more efficient. Here's some of the new compounds that we created. As far as we know, we are unable to find in the literature anywhere that someone else had synthesized these already. So as far as we know, these are new compounds. On the left we have the ligand, and on the right we coordinated copper-1 ions into those coordination sites. So implications for the future, we have some new compounds that can be further characterized and seek to understand their properties. We can further optimize the synthesis, which we have done and can continue to learn how to make these compounds more efficiently. This can lay the groundwork for further development of these types of molecules and can contribute to the body of research of ambiphilic ligand complexes and their properties. So that's a specific field that this could contribute to in understanding ambiphilic ligands. And also this could contribute to the understanding of the reaction mechanisms of small molecules such as N2O that I mentioned at the beginning. If our compounds would work in performing catalysis with these small molecules, it would help us to understand their reaction mechanisms as well. Thank you for listening to this presentation, and I hope you enjoyed it.